Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Find the Joy with Jen. Have you ever felt like life brought you to the edge of something you never planned, and suddenly you're standing there asking, do I jump or do I stay stuck? Recently, I found myself standing on a 30-foot boulder, staring down into a river below, terrified, but also calm. Faithful, but definitely unsure. And I realized something in that moment that completely changed how I understand divorce, courage, and trusting God. If you're navigating divorce and trying to stay faithful, but you're scared, overwhelmed, and unsure of your next step, stay with me because what I learned on that cliff might help you take your next step without feeling so alone. Today, I want to share a story from a recent trip that surprised me, not because it was beautiful or adventurous, but because it gave me language for something so many of you are navigating right now. Because sometimes God teaches us the most about courage, surrender, and trust, not in quiet moments, but when we're standing on the edge of something terrifying, asking ourselves, do I jump or do I stay where I am? If you're navigating divorce or a hard season of faith and you don't want to feel alone in it, I would love for you to subscribe to this channel. This is a space where we talk honestly about healing, faith, and finding joy again, even when life does not go the way we planned. So let me start with the story. If you follow me, you know Eric and I recently celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, and we chose to go to the Azores Islands to celebrate, specifically San Miguel Island off the coast of Portugal. A close friend of mine had visited not long before and told me about this incredible high adventure excursion that involved rappelling down waterfalls. It looked wild, beautiful, and completely unique, something I had never done before. So, almost a year in advance, I booked this trip. As we were planning the trip and we discovered just how rich and varied the Azores are, lush landscapes, incredible food, hiking, culture, and adventure everywhere, we planned a lot of unique activities, but this waterfall rappelling excursion stood out as the most exciting and pivotal event for us on the trip. What I didn't realize when I booked it was this experience involved something called canyoning. I had never heard of canyoning and I didn't fully understand what it meant until the day of the excursion when our guides began briefing us. They explained the gear first: full body wetsuits, waterproof, boots and socks and helmets and gloves and harnesses and ropes. And then they explained what we would actually be doing. Canyoning, they told us, meant getting down the canyon any way possible. That included hiking through rushing water, climbing over massive boulders, rappelling down canyon walls, zip lining across huge drops, and then they casually added jumping off of boulders into the river below. That part was a surprise to me. But still, I was excited. There were 12 of us, adults from different places all around the world, all standing together in this beautiful, lush tropical forest on San Miguel Island, listening to safety instructions before beginning what would be a 6-hour adventure. The excursion started pretty dramatically. We were standing on a bridge for our debriefing and instruction. To start our excursion, we climbed over the side of the bridge about 100 feet in the air and clipped into our harnesses. And one by one, we descended a steep, wet embankment down towards the river below. Within minutes, we realized we were going to be soaked the entire day, and that was just part of the fun of it. The gear made it manageable. The guides were calm and super confident, very friendly, and we were all so excited for this adventure. About an hour into the experience, we reached a point where I could hear rushing water ahead, but I couldn't see what was below. The guides told us to stop right where we were, and one of them stepped forward and walked to the edge of a huge boulder and explained that the next part of our journey involved a 30-foot jump off of this massive boulder into a narrow section of the river below. They pointed out the exact spot where it was deep enough to land safely. Then, without hesitation, the first guide jumped off the cliff. He launched off confidently and popped up out of the water below, smiling and giving the signal that he was safe and it was all clear. My husband volunteered to go next, and I knew he was afraid of heights, but I also knew he wouldn't back down from a challenge, so he didn't hesitate. He ran to the edge and jumped off before we could even talk about it. So I watched as one by one, each of the men jumped off, and then the women started going. And then eventually it was just me and one other woman left standing on the boulder. We both kept stepping forward and then stepping back. Standing on top of that 30-foot boulder, I realized something important. I didn't have to jump. And honestly, that realization really comforted me. It brought a wave of peace. The question wasn't, can I jump? The question was, do I want to? Looking down to that narrow river, my heart was pounding, but my mind was calm. I started coaching myself. What decision will I feel good about later? And what decision will I regret? I knew this was the only jump in the entire 6 hour expedition. And I knew I would likely never have this opportunity again. So I was thinking through this situation. My body was screaming, this isn't safe. Don't do it. But my mind kept saying, I want to leave here knowing that I did something hard. So I made a deliberate choice. I jumped. It was both horrifying and thrilling. I screamed on the way down. The impact knocked the breath out of me. And then it was over. I surfaced relieved, exhilarated, and so proud of myself for doing something that was really scary and not easy for me to do. The rest of the excursion, we clipped into ropes and harnesses that guided us safely down the canyon. But that jump required more courage and trust than you can imagine. So, as I've been thinking about this situation since it happened, I've been reflecting on that moment and I realized why it stayed with me. Because divorce feels exactly like standing on that boulder. Since this experience, I have thought about it so many times and I've thought of so many meaningful analogies that relate to divorce. We navigate our lives just like I was navigating this canyon, getting down through this expedition. I didn't know exactly what was coming. And just like we navigate our lives, we don't know what's coming ahead of us, but we do know with God's help, we can get down, we can get through it no matter what happens. So there are several analogies that I want to share from my experience of jumping off of this boulder as I went through this 6 hour expedition through the forest that relate to divorce. Standing on a 30-foot boulder with your heart racing, knowing there's no halfway down. Divorce often places you at an edge you didn't plan on standing on. You didn't choose the boulder, but now you're there. Divorce feels like you're being led to the edge of something terrifying. So the thought that I want to share about this is that having faith doesn't always remove the cliff from our lives. Sometimes it just reminds you that God is present there on the edge with you. So the second one is looking down versus looking forward. Fear grows when you fixate. The longer you stare at the water, the bigger the fear becomes. Your mind fills with worst case scenario. Fear multiplies when you obsess over it. What if I fail? What if I never heal? What if I'm alone forever if I get a divorce? The danger wasn't in the jump. It was standing there letting my mind tell me stories about how badly things could go. And I see this happen so many times when my clients come to me and they're considering divorce or they're going through it and they're just paralyzed with fear of moving forward with divorce because their mind is just throwing out these worst case scenarios. I want you to know we cannot take action from fear and get a positive outcome. The way I was able to take that leap and jump off of that boulder was reassuring myself that although it was fearful, I had seen many other people do it successfully and they were safe. So the fear was really in my mind. It wasn't in reality. If I followed the instructions carefully, I could traverse this jump safely. And that is true with navigating divorce. Scripture repeatedly warns against fear driven imagination. God invites trust. We need to choose to trust Him as we take these fearful steps forward in our lives. The third analogy that came to my mind is you can't test the water first with divorce. There's no practice divorce. You can't just dip your toe in. You can't climb halfway down. You either jump or you stay stuck. There's no clean, painless, fully controlled way through divorce. Waiting for the perfect clarity just keeps you stuck, frozen in fear. There is no safe, gradual way down. That's exactly how divorce feels. Faith often requires action before understanding, just like stepping into unfamiliar water. Now, I'm not saying that jumping into divorce is the right path for everyone, but for many of us, navigating divorce, it is the best option forward, but it is scary, and I understand that. The fourth analogy that came to my mind is trusting the water to hold you. God doesn't remove the impact. You still hit that water hard and it knocks the breath out of you, but it holds you. God doesn't prevent the pain, but He sustains you through it, just like that water surrounds you when you jump in. The water didn't stop the impact, but it did catch me. And that's how God has met me in divorce. And I have seen Him do the same for so many of my clients. This is a powerful reframing for all of you faithful men and women listening to this message who secretly feel disappointed that God didn't fix things in your marriage, that you have to go through with divorce. Sometimes that's just what our life holds, just like my adventure held this 30-foot jump for me. The fifth analogy that came to my mind was the moment of free fall. Once you leave the rock, all control is gone. All you can do is stay aligned and let gravity do its thing. There is a moment when resisting reality causes more pain than surrendering to it. The hardest part wasn't the jump, it was letting go of control in midair. Surrender is an act of faith, my friend. It is not weakness, but it takes courage to take that leap. And I know it took so much courage for me to take that step off of that boulder. And then gravity took hold. And I recognize that's what it feels like when you have to take that leap and move forward with divorce. The sixth analogy that came to my mind was breaking the surface. You come up different, but alive. You resurface somewhat disoriented, but sometimes exhilarated. You're breathing, you're okay. You did something you didn't think you could. Healing doesn't mean you're not changed. It means you're still standing. Yes, you're changed, but with new strength and clarity and confidence that comes from doing something hard. I didn't come up the same person. I came up a stronger, braver version of myself than before. And I promise you, friend, if divorce is the path ahead of you, you will too. The seventh analogy that I recognize from this experience is hope is contagious. As I stood on top of that boulder, one of the things that gave me courage was watching others who had already jumped. They weren't just surviving, they were smiling and laughing and calling back, saying, "You'll be okay, just go for it." That is exactly how it feels when you begin to see people who have walked through divorce with faith and are now living meaningful, joyful, grounded lives on the other side of it. Often much better, happier, more successful lives than the ones they had before divorce. Sometimes the courage we need comes from seeing someone else already standing safely on the other side. When you're in the middle of divorce, it can feel impossible to imagine a future that holds joy and peace and wholeness again, especially if you're committed to your faith and you deeply value your covenant relationship. I understand that, friend. I have been in your shoes, but I'm also already on the other side. But watching others who have navigated divorce with integrity, holding their faith and trust in God, and seeing that they have built lives filled with purpose and connection and even joy quietly expands what feels possible. I want you to hear that today. I hope that I can give you that inspiration as you're listening today. Sometimes seeing someone else rise and heal and thrive becomes the very thing that can help you believe that you can too. The eighth analogy from this experience that I have for you is you don't have to jump alone. One thing that made this jump possible for me, even when it felt terrifying, was knowing that I wasn't alone. There were experienced guides who had done this many times before, right there with me, before me, and behind me. They checked my gear, they watched the conditions, they stood close and calm and steady, reminding us where to jump and how far to go. I wasn't being reckless, I was being supported and guided. Divorce was never meant to be navigated alone, my friend. Even when you're faithful and prayerful and trying to do all the right things, faith doesn't mean you have to do it by yourself. It means allowing yourself to be supported while you do those things. God so many times works through other people, through coaches and counselors and bishops and trusted friends and faith-filled communities and wise mentors who can see the terrain much, much more clearly when you're overwhelmed and even paralyzed with fear. Just like that jump, having support doesn't remove the fear. It creates safety and clarity and confidence in the process. There's still fear. Healing accelerates when we stop isolating ourselves. And our courage grows when someone steady stands beside us and says, I am here, and you are not doing this alone. You heal faster when you allow yourself to be held by God and by others He places in your path. Okay, the last analogy that I have for you is the rock did not define the outcome. The jump did. The boulder looked terrifying, but it wasn't the villain. Staying stuck would have been. Divorce is not your identity, friend. Your response to it shapes your whole life experience afterwards. That rock didn't ruin the experience, but refusing to move past it would have ruined my whole experience on my excursion. So if you're standing on the edge today, afraid but faithful, unsure but fearful, I want to say this clearly. You are not failing because you're scared, and you are not weak because this is hard, and you are not faithless simply because you don't feel peace about your decision yet. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is acknowledge that we can stay, but we are choosing not to. Let me repeat that, friend. Sometimes we have to take action and move forward and take that big, scary leap and jump off that boulder and choose divorce when you know that that is the right step for you, but not out of recklessness and not out of fear, but out of honesty and clarity and faith. The jump doesn't mean you stop trusting God. Sometimes it means you trust Him enough to move forward, even without guarantees. And when you break the surface, however disorienting, however changed, you will still be breathing, my friend. You will survive. You are still held, you are still loved, and you are still capable of joy, even after divorce. So if you're navigating divorce and you need steady ground, support, perspective, and faith-centered guidance, please know you do not have to navigate this journey alone. Healing happens faster when we stop standing on the edge by ourselves and remain paralyzed in fear, and we take faith-filled action. If you're ready to do that, come and join me inside my faith-filled divorce coaching program. I would love to support you and be your life coach. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this episode has helped you gain some perspective about navigating your divorce journey. And if this episode has resonated with you, especially if you feel like you're standing on the edge right now, give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below and tell me, what are you afraid of? What is keeping you stuck? You don't have to jump by yourself, friend. I am here to help. Remember, there is still joy ahead for you, my friend, and I can help you find it. Bye, y'all.